Okay, so here we are, chapter 7. Let's pull up the PowerPoint and get right to it. So, chapter 7 is social class, the structure of inequality. So you can see a bit of, if you've been reading the textbook, you can obviously see even by this chapter title, that that it is a conflict theory or Marxist bias in the book, which is fine. I think that's kind of where our society is anyway. That's the social construction. So let's get on now. When we hit this social class and the structure of inequality, we're gonna have to work really hard to stay open-minded, or what we call, even saying that, puts people or can put some people like locked in even more into. But remember, we want to use that beginner's mind, right? So whether we bring in a capitalist or a socialist or a Republican or Democrat or family background in ideas, and it may be on the right or the left or the rich or middle class or poor. It could be, let's see if we can check those things at the door. Now, you can come back to those beliefs if you want, but let's at least look at this and let's ask the questions, right, that will lead us to maybe more insight, maybe deeper understanding of the complexities, because we're kind of all in this together, right? Now, this is a caricature, kind of the rich screwing the poor, taking advantage of the poor, where the rich is making all the money and leaving everybody else hanging out. Now, even that in itself, when I first saw that, I was even like, yeah, those greedy, leaving, it's kind of interesting, right? We kind of have, that's kind of a social construction of how we might see, some of us, maybe many of, I think a lot of us in today's culture, how we see the rich and the rest of us, right? That we're in. There's some good support for that, but it's interesting, cartoons oftentimes they tap into our cultural values and beliefs, right, which are socially constructed and to some degree biased, right? So, but let's dig in. I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit on some of it. When I start getting into some complex numbers, it's for you to kind of go, oh, that's kind of interesting, right? Now, there's some other basic general concepts we're going to get into, that are important to understand as concepts and or theories. So let's start. So what is social stratification? So social stratification is, it's the division of society, right? So we're dividing society, right? And we're dividing it into what? Into groups that are arranged. So these groups aren't just willy-nilly, they're arranged in what? A hierarchy. And if you look at, say, geological stratification, right, you go to the Grand Canyon and you look out over the Grand Canyon and you see what? You see these layers, right, of what they call geological stratification. And they're groupings of soils or whatever. I'm not a geologist, but you get the idea, right? So we do that in our society, right? We do that in our society. It goes back, from the beginning of humanity, right? We have generally, and this is kind of a pyramid structure, right, where the most powerful are at the top, and that's the few, and then we have these layers, right, that go out all the way to the bottom where most people are, right, where most people are. And if you look out in nature, if you look just even to mammals, right, whether it's a wolf pack or a lot of work in monkeys, orangutans, gorillas, they have hierarchies, right? So that would indicate to some degree, and you have to be careful about that, but that our biology, right, that is the foundation that we then build the society's house on. Our foundation is that we are a hierarchical species, right? And history and time and place show us that that's true. Now, there'll be some people arguing, well, hunter and gatherer tribes, they didn't have any stratification. And then if you kind of dig into it and you kind of poke it a little bit, well, no stratification really to speak of. Well, you see, they didn't have the wealth, so they couldn't Well, but there's lots of ways, and we'll find out. It's not just, although the focus tends to be as a default on wealth, right? It's power, status, and wealth, right? So you can be in a small tribe or a large family, which a lot of the tribes were. I mean, if, I know was on a trip to Scotland, and they had these what they call cronogs, and they were basically yurts on stilts over water with like a drawbridge, and it was housed about 20 plus or minus people, kind of a generational living back, I don't know, a couple thousand years ago. And they were protected from attack, right? Because they were on the water, right, to some degree, and they could have the upper hand of anybody coming by water, and they had a drawbridge, and but within that that living system, right, there was a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy, and so yeah, I would posit it that you can't find a single group of people, right, without some type of hierarchy, right? Now, as humans, right, which we're different than animals, right, we have the capacity to try to overcome or adjust those biological foundational, but they're still there, right? But we're going to focus today, uh, even though we know that that kind of undergirds society, right? We're going to focus on what's above the foundation of that foundation, what we make of it and how we study it, some of the theories. But that this pyramid kind of shows that it's always been around, right? So it's a division of society, dividing into groups, right? And they're arranged in a hierarchy, okay? And then there are systems of stratification. So society puts in place these systems. Now, typically in sociology, we don't go back too far, but slavery has been around as long as human history has been around, right? So a lot of times human history has been about needing, I mean, power and energy came from humans. It was labor, right? That either labor by humans or labor by animals, and that's what ground the flour. Or if there was conflict between tribes, a tribe would come, like, I want that, I want those animals, or I want that hunting and gathering area, that territory, and we're going to have this conflict, and we're going to go to battle, and the winner then would get the spoils, including the spoils of taking hostage or slave people, a lot of times women and children. And then as society came, entered into religious and then modern era, that slavery became more sophisticated, more institutionalized, and there's still slavery in the world today. China, right, continues to enslave what they call the Uyghurs, or they're a Muslim population. Obviously, in the stratification, they're kind of at the bottom, because they take this group of people and they put them and seems like there's some pretty good evidence that there's a lot of organ harvesting going on, with people that are incarcerated. So if you want to like stand up on that like activist soapbox, and preach the evils of slavery, there's plenty of it going on in the world right now. And that would also include, what just happened in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, with a lot of slavery, child brides of 10 to 12 or 14 years old, women, children being put into, now slavery just means that someone else owns me or has ownership of me, in the sense that they control me. I don't have freedom, right? And then a caste system is a very strong, there's no mobility in a caste system, right? And that would be like a medieval caste system, right? Our modern day, some people would say the new Jim Crow, which is a book by Michelle Alexander, written probably about 10 plus 12 years ago, something like that. And there's a new book recently out I think it's called The New Caste, or it's just called Caste, right? Saying that today America has been and still lives in this caste system, But to some degree, I would say all societies have a stratification. So you could probably define caste in probably all societies, right? China, which is supposed to be this like utopian communist country, the old Soviet Union used to have at least probably 5 or 6 different levels of stratified class in their communist utopian everybody's equal system. I know Cuba does, North Korea does. It's kind of the human condition, right? So some people today in the middle of this COVID would say that as we move toward more of a separating, vaxxed from unvaxxed people, that some people have called that medical apartheid. Some people might consider that, reasonably so, it seems, based on definition, a caste system of sorts, right? And then, of course, social class. And social class is usually based on power, status, and wealth. And we like to think of ourselves as a classless society, where everybody has the freedom to reach the American dream and we all have equal opportunity. It's kind of the ideal, right? But we do have this kind of class system, right? And and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into symbolic interactionism and what meaning we give to upper class, and even within upper class, like old money, new money, and then you have middle class, but then also working class, blue collar, and then low income or lower class groups. Okay, and then of course that's part of intersectionality. And let's take a look at this. So social stratification, again, while we think of it economically, right, there's lots of types, not only social class as the meaning of socioeconomic, but gender can be stratified, ethnicity can be stratified, age, religion. You can, and we've talked about this, so I'll let you, if you want to freeze it, pause and read that, I'll let you do that, but I want to be sensitive of time. Now, it's really important, I kind of put this in from an old slide. It's kind of important to understand the difference when we talk about stratification on a social class or economic system. We're kind of going to start to focus more on that. The difference between income and wealth. Okay, income and wealth. So income that is freed up, right, that's left over, becomes wealth if you don't spend it, but you invest it, right? Or you put it in the bank, or you bury it under. And let's take a look at this a little bit. So the differences between income and wealth. So income is a flow of money going to factors of production. So I'm going to exchange, right, my human capital, I'm going to exchange that for an exchange of value to get money back, right? I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to give you something, sell you something, give you my labor, and in return, you're going to give me income. And that's, and income includes wages and salaries from jobs, rental income from property if you own like a rental house, or you want to rent I don't know, I guess suppose you could rent your car, you could rent you could rent a lot of things. So interest from savings, profits flowing from shareholders, stocks and bonds. So any source of money that you didn't have that comes in, that comes into you. Okay, that's different than wealth. So income is what's flowing in to your reservoir, if you will. Wealth is what? The reservoir itself, right? And then whatever you spend on whatever flows out of on the other side of the dam, right? Then that either depletes your wealth, based on inflow and outflow, or it raises your wealth, right? So wealth is the current value of stock of assets, not stocks and bonds, but it includes that, but of assets that's owned by someone or a society as a whole. In this case, we're going to individualize it, right? But it could be a group. We could measure a group's average wealth, or a country's wealth. But it includes savings in the bank accounts, ownership of property. Now, it doesn't count what you get back it doesn't count the interest coming in, that's income. It counts what the principal that you have, or the value of the property, or the value of the shares of stocks or businesses that you own. And wealth held in pension funds, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? I have a guy and his wife that I coached with, and sisters, and they're starting to near retirement age. They've been teachers for 35 years. And of course, you know, us teachers, we got it pretty easy because it's really a seasonal job. I mean, we get 2 or 3 weeks off for winter break, a week or so off for spring break, 2 or 3 months off for summer. I mean, if you do the hours, we're only working about 66% of the time. 66% of the time from a full-time 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year job, right? So we work, so the average person working 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year will work 2,000 hours a year. We as teachers, we might work 13 to 1,400 hours. Anything more than that is a little over the top. I'm sure there are people that do that, but as we've all seen, teachers, you know, they get in at, a lot of them get in at 7:45 and they're out by 3:35. So anyway, and they have great benefits. Now they don't make much. I mean, if they're a 2-income household in this case, they're probably, I'm guessing they've been in it for 30, 35 years. I'm guessing in Oregon, we don't pay our teachers really well, but we, you know, they're probably bringing in, I'm guessing 140, 150 plus benefits, which the two of them. So it's probably about $200,000, maybe on the downside, 150. Hard to believe it's much less. So anyway, and they'll retire in a couple of years after they put their 35 years in, and they will retire with a pension, because that's where I'm going with this at the bottom of it. And that pension is an income flow that you could buy or that it has value. And that value in pensions of police, fire, military, teachers, other government workers, usually is $1 million+ would be to buy that annuity. And so the two of them, teachers for 35 years, probably retire in their mid to late 50s, and they'll be multimillionaires when they retire from teaching seasonally. That ain't a bad gig. That's pretty freaking good. I mean, and of course, you know, I know as teachers, we do complain about our, you know, about our wages and salaries. But anyway, okay, so income and wealth. I just wanted you to understand the difference between income and wealth. Now, usually when we usually measure by income, and we usually measure household income, you know, when we're doing large macro studies, right? Wealth is harder to measure because it's like, how do you know people's wealth? And, you know, it changes and it goes up and down. And okay, so the theoretical perspectives, let's take a look at the 3 theoretical perspectives and how they apply to social class, or what we call stratification, right? So the Davis-Moore thesis. So a guy named Davis and a guy named Moore got together to try to explain how does this thing that's been around in human history forever, right? As long as humanity has been alive and we've been in groups, how does it function or operate, right? And how does that functioning, according to functionalism, provide and promote, right, social stability, right, and solidarity? And this is what they came up with. This is their thesis. And it's been, you can judge for yourself, but it's been recognized, you know, as a legit thesis. Okay, so they say that number one, not every job or task or exchange of value, they're not all equally pleasant to perform. And they mostly focus on jobs because that's kind of, you know, that's an easy way to look at stratification. So not every job is equally pleasant to perform. So we pay people more for jobs that aren't as equally pleasant to perform as opposed to jobs that are. Now, that's one of many factors, right? It's not the only factor, right? So if it's riskier, if it's dirtier, if it's nastier, we tend to pay people a little bit more. Number 2, requires various degrees of talent and ability to perform. Okay, so if you're in the top 0.1% as a musician or an athlete or a CEO or those are kind of the top, a doctor or lawyer, you're going to probably have had lots of ability to perform and talent. Even, believe it or not, we think of talent as like singing or athletic or acting. but it takes talent. It takes a certain amount of skill is learned, but talent that kind of, whether it's a temperament or a charisma to be successful, or the ability to think and to figure things out as, or a leadership talent, and you tend to pay people more the higher up to that level of talent and ability to perform, right? If I said, hey, a neurosurgeon we pay a neurosurgeon a lot because all the schooling and the ability to perform that incredible task. So they're generally going to make more money. And we look at how this job functions in society and how important we claim it to be, right? So we may say we value teachers, right? And of course, there's an economic supply and demand in that as well to some degree, and probably also the ability of talent to perform. But, gosh, we pay a professional athlete, an elite professional athlete, more in one day than we pay, in some cases, than we pay a fifth grade teacher, over a 10-year period. I mean, it sounds sick and ridiculous, but that's our culture. And that's our society, that's our American society, where we place emphasis as a culture. And then the last thing that they say is that part of what helps make this project work with these factors is that society must have rewards as motivations to fulfill a role. Okay. So in order to make society work, right, we have these roles, that there has to be motivation. If there's no motivation, and that's what happened to China when China first had the communist revolution in like 1948, 1949, Mao Zedong, right, took over, had a people's revolution, and it's like a giant, what do they call that? It'll come to me anyway. It's a giant, everybody works and everybody gets out. Everything's equal, right? And so he said, okay, we're all going to work really hard, and we're all going to work really hard in the rice paddy fields, and we're all going to get the same bowl of rice. Well, if you get the same rewards, but you don't have incentive to work, right? Then what happened in China is people decided not to work. It wasn't enough to have this ideal of, hey, it's all for the good of everybody, and we're all gonna, let's go, it's all work, and we're all gonna get, and woo, yeah, it's this ideal. But without motivation, what happened is a lot of people didn't work, but a lot of people everyone got their bowl of rice at the end of the day. But what happened to the production of rice when people weren't working? Because rice paddy fields are pretty intensive labor. The production of rice went down. What happened to those bowls of rice? They started to shrink and disappear. People starved to death. Right? Tens of millions of people died when Mao Zedong tried to bring this utopian ideal of communism to the Chinese people. So what he had to do, and this is very typical, and that's what Davis and Moore say, is you have to find a system of motivation. So they rented the rice paddy fields, and because you can't own any property, at least up until most recently. Cuba, you couldn't own property. China, you couldn't own property. It was owned by everyone, or the state, right? And then the other thing too is, so they had to rent, so that and if you didn't pay your rent, then you lose your farm or your house, or so you had to find a way to provide. So you were incentivized to work, right, to exchange money for value, or work for rent, right? And then the last one is a way to distribute rewards among various positions, right? So again, if you look at those top three, it's a way to distribute rewards, right, based on what we think is pleasant to perform, our ability of talent and skills and education, and how important we think it is. It's a way to what? Distribute, right, this power structure, right? Okay, so that's functionalism, Davis-Moore thesis. And it's based on an exchange of value philosophy, right? And if you really think about it, even in our own relationships, right, of say with our kids, or with our parents, or with our significant others to some degree. And I don't mean to sound jaded, but it is kind of a exchange of value, right? And that's why we get into relationship with some people and we don't with others, or we get into relationship with some people and we go, hey, I don't think that this is an equitable exchange of value, if you will, whatever that looks like in practical terms within this relationship. I'm not getting out. I feel like he or she's getting all out. So anyway, okay. Let's move over to conflict theory. Conflict theory, okay? So Marx starts off with this idea of wealth. It's all about wealth and it's all about capitalism, and capitalism is the structure, and conflict theory really focuses on structure. And the original conflict theory as it relates to socioeconomic looks at capitalism and why the structure or the rules of the game called capitalism in an economic system really dictate what happens to us in this. It's like when you play Monopoly, you have rules of the game and you play within those rules, but it's the rules that dictate, ultimately that there are, in Monopoly at least, winners and losers, right? So the rules of capitalism, Marx says, yeah, there's winners, right? The capitalists, and there's losers, the proletariat. Now, he did tend to overlook in the mid 1800s to late 1800s this growing middle class, right? He kind of because it was a feudal system that had pretty much, but even the feudal system had, like, you had levels of royalty, like you had the queen or the king, and then you had the ladies and the lords, and then you had priests and military, and then you had the kind of peasants and serfs, right? So even that had a certain pecking order of stratification. But Weber, right? Max Weber comes along, a sociologist, and he says it's not just income and wealth, right? It's also what? Power and status. And this is based on a Marxian philosophy, which I've already kind of injected. And there's Karl Marx right there, probably arguably the most influential person of the 20th century. We can talk about that if you're interested. Ask me in class, we'll talk about it. And, again, there's another, a pyramid of a capitalist system, although it doesn't look that much different than the Egyptian pyramid. Now, what do you mean by capitalist, Rutgers? I hear that term, and we kind of just assign this red light, green light, either capitalism, green light, I like it, or capitalism, red light, I don't. What is capital? Capital is money, right? Capital is money, and money that gets invested in order to create a means of income, right? It could be a farm, it could be a business, it could be a coffee stand, it could be a factory. When Marx was doing his thing, it was capital investment in factories. Now, before the capitalist era, we were in the feudal system, and the queen and the king, they owned everything, right? They owned the property, they owned the fish in the rivers, they owned the deer in the meadows. It was always the king or the queens, right? But there was still this exchange of value, right? You do something for me and I will give you value back, right? Unless it was slavery, right? Or a caste system, which was slavery light. So, but there seems to be, human societies for tens of thousands of years have traded, right? Goods and services, right? So if that's the exchange of value, if that's what at the core capitalism generally is, an exchange of value, well, then it's been around for a long time, right? What we rename it and call it, the nuances. Okay, so you can take a look at this, and it's kind of very similar. Again, you get the idea of stratification, right? Now, let me go back real quick. One of the things that Marx did talk about that's fascinating, right, is this. He believed that what capitalism did was that it alienated people from the product themselves, their mission or purpose, and their customer, right? So let's go back a few hundred years, and if I was going to make, say, furniture, I would cut down the tree, I would mill the wood, I would lathe it, I would put it together, I would glue it, and then I would sell it, and maybe I'd make it by special order for the customer. So I have the whole process from beginning to end, right? If I'm doing coffee, right? If I'm doing coffee, then, I grow the beans, I harvest the beans, I roast the beans, I grind the beans, I brew the beans, and then I put it in a cup and I give it to my final customer. Right now, right, we've kind of McDonaldized this, right, into that. You work at a Starbucks and you're one piece of that brewing. You might take the order, you might do the brewing, you might give it to somebody who then hands it to the customer, right? So you're alienated, right? Alienated from, you're kind of a cog in the wheel, right? Now, if Marx was here, one of the things I would ask him is, do you really think it was capitalism, Carl, or do you think, to what degree, and of course, it still is a system, right? Or to what degree do you think technology, right, the ability to produce things at a more efficient means and cost, or the technology that's allowed us to become specialized and kind of cogs in the wheel, right? I mean, I don't know that today, I'm a cog in the wheel at COCC in our educational, yeah, I mean, I don't teach all subjects. I'm specialized into sociology, right? And I'm in one college, a community college at that level, as part of this process. I don't see students from beginning to end. I don't see students in college in all subjects. Yeah, I don't know. These are great questions to think about and ponder if you're a curious cat. And I hope I'm at least tickling you a little bit in that way. So let's look at symbolic interactionism. Class consciousness, right? The understanding and idea that I belong to a class, and what does that meaning hold? And how do I identify with that class? Gosh, yeah, it's just, I mean, and really what's interesting too about stratification, the studies they've done about stratification, is no matter where you are on the stratified level, we tend to look up with a bit of disdain, and we tend to look down with a bit of disdain, whatever place on the pyramid we are. So if we're lower middle class, or if say we're working class or blue collar, we tend to look at white collar with a bit of disdain. Well, and that makes sense, right? Because whatever tribe you're part of or group you're part of, you tend to think of yourself as being the ideal spot, right? That we are a little bit better, than, if you're a Beaver fan, then, well, we may not be winners, but at least we're not arrogant whatever's like the Ducks. And if you're the Ducks, you don't see yourself as arrogant, you see yourself as winning. And they say, what do you expect? And, and we're winning and the Beavers aren't. So yeah, we're so tribalized, and we tend to think of and if you don't think of yourself as better, and you can get out of that and join another group that'll have you, that you more identify with, you will do that. And you will also then become, within that system, the influences and pressures and compliances and the deviance and sanctions and pressures to comply to that as well. So that's pretty crazy. So social construction of class, right? And what those meanings are. We just talked about that. So you start with a symbol, let's say, blue collar, or let's say, well, we talked about blue collar, right? But anyway, we talked about it has meaning, and then we act or react. So let's even take, let's take the rich, somebody at, oh gosh, I don't know, a wealthy neighborhood. Let's take somebody on the west side, maybe somebody in Broken Top, right? And, oh, I live in Broken Top, and this is the kind of car I drive, and this is the kind of people I hang out with, and this is the kind of restaurants I go to, and the vacations I take, right? They're a symbol that represent like this bigger idea of social class. What meaning do we give that? Well, we might give it a lot of meaning. Lucky, spoiled, arrogant, hardworking. There's lots in different groups, right? If you're in that group, you might give it a different meaning than if you're, say, middle class, hoping to be there, or say if you're generationally poor, and you look at that, privileged, spoiled, greedy, and then how do we act or react to people that we identify with that symbol of class in this case? How do we act or react to somebody that fits in that category? Or how do we act or react to somebody that says like homeless or poor? What meaning do we give that? Addict, lazy, disgusting, dirty, addicted, and then how do we treat that person based on that meaning, right? Oof, ooh. So yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I love the idea that, hey, as sociologists, we don't just study priests, man. We study priests and prostitutes, or prostitutes and priests, depending on we study it all, right? And to be able to have that beginner's mind, to be able to say, hey, this is my social location. I'll pull myself out and I'm going to look at all those levels and apply these theoretical perspectives. Okay, social mobility, the movement of individuals or groups within a hierarchical system of social class. So how much or how able is a person to move up or down along the social class, the stratified level? Can you move from low income to middle income to high, or we call it quintiles sometimes? Is the system closed or open, right? Can a closed system means is very caste like. You can't move up or down. You're born into that, you're stuck in that, and that's where you are. An open system would say, yeah, there's a lot of movement, not many impediments at all, right? And of course, it's not just all open or all closed, right? It's a bit open, a lot open, not much open, a lot closed, a little closed. And so we'll look at that a little bit today as well. Intergenerational and intra-generational mobility. I'll touch on that a little bit and give you some graphics. Okay, so right now, if you want to take a break and hit pause and go, wow, that was a lot of stuff, right? Okay, now let's get back to it. Okay, so these are called quintiles. Now take the black dotted line out, because the black dotted line is the top 5%. Okay, but the blue line is the top quintile, and so a quintile is 1/5. So you have an equal number of households, 20% the top quintile, 20% the second, 20% of the households in the middle, and 20% in the fourth quintile or bottom, and then 20% in the bottom quintile. And of course, in 2016, the mean income, if you look at that chart up there, right, in the top quintile, the mean, which means the average in the top quintile, was 213,000. So if you're in the top 20% of households and you're looking at the average, the mean, the average income for the top 20% households, it'd be right around 213,000, 214,000. You can see. Now this is before taxes or redistribution, right? This is before taxes or redistribution. So what do you see? You can see, and we'll talk about this in class, you can see what this gap, right? And we'll talk about that in class. Now, a lot of times people look at this and they say, oh, well, the rich get richer and the poor stay poor, or get poorer in some cases, right? And but that doesn't take into account mobility. So we'll talk about that in class as well. But I've also included, now you can look at this based on age. So here is the groups of age and how median real household income. So all of the graphs I'm going to show you today are adjusted for inflation. So it's apples to apples, very important. Income growth by age bracket. I'll let you look at that if you want to pause it. This is another one based on race, and you can see median household income, or average, the mathematical average, median. No, the median is the one in the middle, not average. Not the mean, but the median, right? So the median is like the center spot in the road, that little, so there's as many people having income on that side as low income on that side, and it's the middle person, or the middle household in this case. So you can see, and I'll let you take a look at that as well. We'll maybe talk about this in class. All right, and then social mobility, intergenerational. Now, before I get to this, what I want to do is I want to show you, a quick video that I think you'll enjoy about social mobility. Okay, so here we go.
We're going to talk about inequality and opportunity in America. Let's start by dividing the population up into 5 equally sized slices. If you're boring like me, you might call them quintiles. In an absolutely equal society where everybody had the same amount of money, each fifth of the distribution would get a fifth of the money. It would look like this. Of course, that's not how it is. In the real world, the bottom quintile, the bottom fifth, gets 5% of the money, and the top fifth get more than half the money. But I think in terms of fairness, and certainly in terms of American fairness, the question's less what's the gap between the bottom and the top, and it's more what are your chances of making it from the bottom to the top? How mobile is society? How far does where you're born on the ladder affect where you end up on the ladder? So in a perfectly mobile society, an opportunity utopia, being born down here in the bottom quintile would have no effect on where you ended up. You'd be equally likely to make it to the top as to stay at the bottom. But now I want to show you what it's really like. Right now, for the people born at the bottom, more than 1 in 3 of them will remain stuck at the bottom, and just 1 in 10 are going to make it all the way up to the top. That's bad enough, but it's even worse for certain groups in the population. If you were born in the bottom quintile and you're a Black American, you have a 50% chance of remaining stuck at the bottom and just a 3% chance of making it Horatio Alger style all the way to the top. This is the picture for Black America. For white Americans, the picture looks close to that utopia with roughly the same chances of making it to the top of the distribution as of being stuck at the bottom. Those who are born at the bottom and are raised by parents who are never married. And for that group, the odds of making it to the top are pretty slim as well. For them, it looks like this. For those raised by married parents, it looks like this. Again, it's pretty close to what you might hope for in a perfectly mobile society. Those who are born at the bottom, if they're raised by married parents, have a pretty good chance of making it to the top. So if you don't complete high school, there's a 50% chance you're going to stay stuck at the bottom if you were born at the bottom, and a 1% chance that you're going to make it to the top 20% of the income distribution as an adult yourself. So for them, it looks like this. If you're born at the bottom, born in this bottom fifth, but you're one of the few born down here who managed to get a 4-year college degree, transforms your chances of moving up the income distribution. Go to college. We can have a long argument about the gap between the rich and the poor, but I think we can all agree that we don't want to live in a society where you're born determines so strongly your chances in life of where you end up. America has a dream of equal opportunity, and we're a very long way right now from that dream. We have a big problem, and we need big solutions.
Okay, wow, interesting. Okay, I thought that would be a good way for you to have a different voice, kind of look at, an exercise in with some different variables. Okay, so let's get back on this because I want to, I don't want to rush through it, but I don't want to be really super long either. So here's some data. I think this is Pew Research. Pew Research Center did this. And this is if you're born in the bottom quintile. So it's kind of along the lines of what we just saw. If you're born in the bottom quintile, right, 57% move out of the bottom quintile. 43% are stuck in the bottom quintile, okay? If you're born, say, in the middle quintile, which is this blue, right? If you're born into the middle quintile, you have a 43% chance of moving up, 43%, and a 34% chance of falling down, 23% chance of staying where you are. You're stuck, according to the language here. If you're born in the top quintile, right, you have a 60% chance of falling out as an adult. So intergenerational is from one generation to the next, right? Measuring how mobile, right, kids are compared to where they started under their parents. So from their parents' generation to their kids when the kids become an adult. And 40% of those in the top quintile are stuck in the top as adults. And we'll talk a little bit more of that maybe even in class, but that's intergenerational. Now, the gentleman in the Lego video talked about education. Pew Research breaks it down even more into some graphical and with some numbers similar to that. So the blue is you went to college. The red is you didn't go to college or you didn't get your college degree. So if you're in the bottom quintile and you get your college degree, you have a 90% chance of moving out of the bottom quintile as born in the bottom quintile, 90% chance if you get your college degree. So if you're in class, which you are, then you're in the right spot if this is what your value system is, right? If, you know, and I'll let you read the rest of it, but I just thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Now, this is still intergenerational. Intra-generational mobility is within an adult's lifetime. And the University of Michigan did a 10-year study, a very famous study. And what they did was they took a snapshot of where people were, and they said, we're going to come back 10 years later, right? And we're going to see where people are. Now, they did it young enough. I think the oldest age group was 53 or 55, so that people 10 years later wouldn't be retired. So they did it so that in 10 years, most would not be retired. So mostly people that are adults in the working age group. And so they said, okay, we'll take a snapshot and we'll divide it into quintiles, households, right? Household income, right? In this case, the top 20% of households, the second, the middle, and then we'll follow those people. And 10 years later, where did that household end up? Well, a little less than half, 10 years later, fell out of the top quintile. Okay, if you look at the bottom quintile, here the people are in these households, the bottom 20% of household incomes, and a little less than half or about half moved up within a 10-year span, right? So if you look at these graphs, would you say we're an open system or a closed system or a mostly open system or a mostly closed system, right? I mean, those are kind of value interpretation perspectives, but at least you have what? You have some data that supports your interpretation. So intergenerational, intra-generational mobility. Now, there was an interesting social mobility study by Herschel and Rank. It was, this is a little older than I like, but it was such an amazing study. It was a 44-year longitudinal study. And what they found was that 12% of the US was in the top 1% for at least 1 year. So more than 1/10 of American households are in the top one. They're a 1%er at least for 1 year. And 39% of US households are in the top 5% for at least 1 year. More than half of US households make it to the top 10 for at least 1 year. And almost 3/4 make it in the top quintile for at least 1 year. And in Oregon, which is fairly close to our national average, to get in the top quintile, you need a household income of about $110,000 in today's dollars, right? Today's dollars, right around 110,000 will put you in the top quintile. That's that gets your toe in the door, your pinky toe in the water in the pool. Okay, and then 54% of the US experience poverty, so more than half experience poverty or near poverty. I'm not sure what that means, but near poverty, but I'm sure they have numbers, at least once between the ages of 25 and 60. So again, man, it's interesting. Mobility, yes, no, open system, to what degree, right? These are great questions to ask, right? That you can go, wow, I've got some data that supports, you know. Now, we're gonna talk a little bit about the poor in America. Now, it's interesting because 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson began the war on poverty, right? And that supposedly is like, hey, man, we went to war on poverty, and well, let's see here. So after World War II, that's when we had a pretty high level of poverty. Our poverty rate was 35% right after the war. And then we started building the middle class. We put people back to work, rebuilding the world, right? That was our advantage, is that Europe was destroyed. Japan was destroyed. Maybe Australia was the only person really somewhat competing with America, but they didn't have the power of production like we did. And so we benefited putting people back to work and rebuilding the world that had been destroyed in World War II. And as we did, the poverty rate was dropping. So, and then it kind of has leveled out since about the late 60s. It's kind of hovered around 12 to 13%, depending on recessions and good growth periods, right? Now, the red is how much money we've put into the means tested welfare spending. So we to wage our war on poverty, we have increased this. And so I guess my question would be, economically speaking, has the spending, have we won the war on poverty? I mean, it was already going, I mean, maybe in humanity maybe my hypothesis would be possibly that there's always going to be about a 10 to 15% level of poverty if there's a good, reasonably good system in place, right? Okay, so kind of interesting. Take it for what it's worth. According to the Brookings Institute or institution, a study published in 2009, if a person graduates from high school, works a full-time job, and waits until 21 to get married and have a child, his or her chance of succeeding in life and becoming a member of the middle class rises to 76%. If you do those things, get a high school degree, get a full-time job, and wait till you're 21 to be married and have kids, you have a 76% chance of being in the middle class. If you don't finish high school, you don't marry, and you have a baby before the age of 21, his or her chance of becoming poor soars to 74%. So kind of interesting, right? Some pretty simple stuff. Now, there's a lot of things that get in the way, the challenges, the hurdles, right? We can talk about that a little bit too in class. This was a New York City promotion. I think it's probably 5 to 8 years old. I'm trying to think of the governor at the time, or the mayor of New York. I think it was New York City, because they were having some poverty issues. So they put this kind of promo ad out. If you finish high school, get a job, and get married before having children, you have a 98% chance of not being in poverty. Huh, kind of interesting. Now, sociologists, we want to know what are the social influences that give a greater push towards those markers, and what social influences might hinder or influence the hindrance of achieving those social markers, right? Kind of interesting. All right, moving to the middle class. Is it dead or alive? There's the middle class, the gravestone, rest in peace. Well, let's take a look. Some people believe the middle class is dead or dying, or some people say, no, it's alive. Let's take a look. So again, Pew Research, great research center. Brookings is also good as well. A lot of good ones out there. So in 1971, this was the curve, right, of income, household income. In 2015, okay, this was a really big study. You had this pink or purple or whatever color you want to call that, right? And this spikes at the end because it just keeps going out. It keeps going out for millions of dollars a year income, right? So they just collected all that tail and they put it into one grouping, both blue and so you have what you have and we'll look at a similar curve in another graph. But where would you rather live? Would you rather live in the society of blue, or would you rather live in the society of Dusty Rose? Okay, I'll let you look at it if you want, but I'm going to keep going. So median household income in the US in 2018 was right around $60,000. In I don't know, median income. Oh, in Oregon, well, let's see. Yeah, it was 59 in the US, in Oregon. That's right, Oregon in 2018. In Oregon, it was right at 60. The US was a little higher. The average household income, the mean in Oregon was 80,000. The per capita income in Oregon is 32. I bet it's probably up a little bit right now, and will probably tend to stay up. The Oregon top 20%, I already mentioned that, 110,000. And the US 1%er breakthrough is 488,000 in 2018. Okay, and then you can also look at age, right? So median household income in Oregon by age of the householder. So the main household provider, income earner, the dominant income earner, household under 25, 30,000, householder 25 to 44, 66,000, householder 45 to 64, 71, and older than 65, 44,000. 44,000. There's a book, let's talk about the rich for a little bit. We talked about the middle class, let's talk about the rich. There's a really interesting book called The Millionaire Next Door. The author put it out a number of years ago, TJ Stanley, but he updates it every couple of years so he can sell more books and stay current. I'm sorry, so he can stay current with the correct data, not sell more books. I'm teasing. Okay, so what does he say about who are the millionaires? Who are the millionaires? And he identifies, right, some demographics, some characteristics of millionaires. They live well below their means. So they're savers, not spenders. They're not consumers, they're savers, they're investors, right? They live well below their means, which means that if you live below your income, then you take that income and it goes into your wealth, which is what we're measuring. The millionaire next door is not income. The millionaire next door is defined by you have $1 million of wealth, okay? They allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently. They're very efficient in their allocation of time, energy, and money in ways conducive to building wealth. So their value and their focus is on wealth, and they're using, in part at least, and they're using their time, energy, and money efficiently in that endeavor. They believe that financial independence is more important than displaying high social status. So they have a value on wealth, but not necessarily flaunting it on achieving it, right? Okay, their parents did not provide economic outpatient care. So in other words, the vast majority of millionaires didn't get much help at all, if any, from their parents, right? They were what we used to call self-made, although today that social construction of meaning has shifted to, if you're a millionaire, you didn't build that, right? Their adult children are economically self-sufficient. So millionaires, by the way, they tend to be older. Like the average age of a millionaire, I think, is like 57 years old. Okay, so the average age of a millionaire, so it takes time to get there, right? And they are married. The average millionaire is married, which means probably to some degree, at least for some time, 2-income household earners, or at least a team effort to get there, okay? And they raise their children to be economically self-sufficient. They are proficient in targeting market opportunities, okay? So they're focused and aware, and they choose the right occupation. Ooh, that's probably a really big one, right? Okay, they choose the right occupation, probably pretty important. So none of this should be earth-shattering, but it's a good reminder. Okay, so that's the rich, according to TJ Stanley in the book, The Millionaire Next Door. All right, measuring income inequality. So a Gini coefficient, right, is a measurement intended to represent the income inequality or wealth inequality within a nation or group. Examples. So a lower number, like, so it goes from 0 to 1, right? And Denmark is the lowest at just under, but it's rounded to 0.25, right? And sometimes people get rid of the point, they just call it 25 on the 0 to 100. So 100 is the greatest inequality, 0 is everybody's equal. So there's no country where everybody's equal, right? That's idealism, that's utopia, that's fantasy, right? But Denmark, Sweden, and Japan all sit at right about 0.25. Canada and France at 0.33. Australia, Spain, Poland, and South Korea and the UK, 0.35. So you can see with each level, right, there's a little bit more inequality. Okay, the US fits in this range of 0.40 to 0.50. The UK, I'm sorry, the US is at 0.41, and Turkey's at 0.44. Mexico, for example, our southern partners, our northern partners were at 0.33. Our southern partners, neighbors, Mexico is at 0.46. China, right, who says, has a high value supposedly of equality, has a Gini coefficient, so it measures income inequality and wealth inequality at 0.47, right? Almost 20% higher than the US. And Cuba is around the same, and North Korea is too. So these idealistic equal socialist communist countries do not do very well. Their poverty is far greater. Their income, household income per capita, is pretty close to poverty levels for Cuba, China, the old USSR, East Germany. So I don't know if socialism, and we'll talk about that toward the end of the term. And then of course, 0.50 to 0.60, which is the highest, there's not many countries that are above 0.6. Peru, Mexico's in there. You know what? How did Mexico get in there? Anyway, Mexico should not be in there. Brazil and South Africa. Okay, so that just gives you an indication. The global average is 0.41 and rising. Now, a lot of times people say it's capitalism that creates this expanding income inequality or wealth gap or income gap, right? Even in Denmark, Sweden, and Japan, the gap, right, between the household incomes, right, between the different quintiles is growing, right? I would say it's as much, maybe more. My hypothesis would be it's mostly due to technology and technological advances, and probably global, a global world, right? Global markets. Okay, here's a global inequality comparison. I'll let you look at this if you're interested in this. Again, I want to try and be sensitive to time. So, but the US is here. So basically I'll talk about the US, but this is pretty complex if you really want to get down, even though it looks pretty simple. But the bottom 10%, the 10 percentile in the US is 39% of the median US household income, and the 90th percentile is at 210%. So we have a greater inequality, right? Because our line is longer. If we look at like Sweden up here, Sweden's line is shorter, so their inequality isn't as much, but their wealth opportunity is far less. We have a lot more wealthy people. And then if you look like on the impoverished side, you look at that and you go, well, there's not that much. So 39% for US, 38% for Sweden. So our poor in US are doing about like a lot of these countries, but our wealthy do it. So there's a lot more income difference or disparity, right? But I'll let you look at that, and you can pause if you want to look at that, but that's kind of just a general place to start. Okay, growing Gini. So again, this is somewhat reminiscent of what we saw on that Pew research, right? Where and this is dollars to dollars, right? This is adjusted for inflation. The median 1995 versus the median 2014. So we have a greater, so it's a flatter curve, right? When there's a flatter curve, there's more what? There's more there's a more diversity, right, of income, right? The difference between the haves and the have-nots is far greater, or the rich and the poor, right? But everybody as a whole are doing better, okay? Back in 1995, you could see what? There wasn't as much inequality, right? And of course, here's a Gini, here's the population. Well, here's the population, the percent of population. This is 79 compared to 2010. Again, adjusted for inflation. And this is Gini on pre-tax basis, right? On a pre-tax basis. And of course, you're going to get a little bit of Ginies that have different how they're measured, who they measured, when they measure it. So you're going to have some differential. So you can't get too locked into, oh, this is an absolute, right? And because you're going to get a little bit of a different reading, but that it's in the ballpark, right? But you can take a look at that as well, and I'll move on. And then I saw this. I thought this is very interesting. So on the left, this is the Gini coefficient over from 1920 to 2014, and this is the English-speaking world on the left, right? And you can see that our Ginies, our equality was becoming more equal until 1980, and then in 1980, it started becoming more unequal or less equal. English speaking, right? United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Ireland, Australia. And then over here you had Western culture, but it was Europe, non-English speaking, and included Japan. And it was not a U-shaped curve, but an L-shaped curve. Okay, very interesting, very interesting. So something in the Western English culture, values, beliefs, behaviors, norms, right, was different than in the European culture, which is slightly different. And then let's look at this is the last slide, so hang in there. This is a US and global perspective. So individual US poverty line, our poverty line is right around 12,000. 20,000 annual US household or annual US income, US poverty line, global quintile. So if now when I say this, the poverty line at 12,000 was for an individual. At 20,000, I think it's either a household of 3 or 4, right? So that matters. So that's why it's bumped up 20,000. And so the US poverty line with 3 or 4 in a household at 20,000, that puts you in the top 20% in the world. So our poverty line for a household of say 4 puts you here. We call it poverty. Globally, we call you in the top quintile. The median US household income of 60,000 puts you in a top global 10%, right? If you have 2 people working, well, actually, let's see. I just saw in Sisters McDonald, if you had 2 people in a household working at the Sisters McDonald's at $17.50 an hour, and then worked there for 3 months and got bumped to $20 an hour, and you had 2 people, that's around 80,000 if you're working full time, you'd be in the top 10% without a high school degree working at McDonald's. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Net worth, if your net worth of 4,500, that puts you in the top half globally. If you have a net worth, if you have $4,500 worth of the value of your car, your clothes, your jewelry, your bank account, all you need is 4,500 and you're in the top 50% most wealthy people in the world. Wow. If your net worth is 95,000, you're in the top 10% of wealth. If you have $55,000 after tax household income, you're a 1%er globally. You're a 1%er globally. Wow. And then more than half of the world, 50% plus, more than half, lives on less than 10,000 per year, and 10% of the world lives on less than $1.90 per day. And this is much improved over the last 10 to 20 years, much improved. We're doing a lot to bring the world out of poverty. Okay, so that is a pretty long lecture, but I hope you found it interesting. I hope you took the breaks, and we'll see you in class. All right, bye-bye.